Hello and welcome to another great episode of the Ideal Investor Show. And as you know, this year we want to bring you special guests. And one of the core underlying things that I like to do is to give you opportunities to diversify your investments. Now, you know the majority that we help you with and mentor you with is for residential real estate, but that is, in my opinion, probably about 70% or so. What do you do with the rest to really diversify? And so today we have a wonderful guest. Maxwell Nee is with us, and what he will help us understand is how you can do things as an investment that you can also personally enjoy. And what he does and helps people to do is basically invest in wine and whiskey. And the joke that you will hear us talk about during this episode, and I want you to pay attention and figure out when that actually happens, is why would you always buy 2 bottles of everything? And in a sense, we will resolve what the myth about buying 2 bottles of the investment in wine or the investment in whiskey that you want to do. And we will actually learn why this would be a good investment and how it actually works, so that a tiny little slice, besides having stocks and having real estate and other things, could also be well invested in wine and whiskey. And I'm hoping you're really curious to find out how that really works. All right, welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show. And today we're going to do something quite different, and it's a little bit self-serving, but also because Max wanted to actually have an opportunity to tell the world about what he's doing. So we're going to do this together. Max, welcome to the Ideal Investor Show.
Thank you for having me, Axel.
Yeah, absolutely. So why did I say it's a little self-serving? And before we actually started recording, I mentioned it to Max already. I got fascinated because, as everybody knows, we do investing in real estate, or what I call value assets, which also includes gold, silver, and stuff like that. And so because well before I was supposed to, was drinking wine, I looked into what other things, and there was this NFT craze for a while. So I thought, well, I'm drinking wine all the time and I like certain kinds of beverages. Maybe that is something interesting. And like I told Max, I found an organization called whiskey.de in Germany that actually offers both to send out wine and whiskey, but they also offer to invest in it. And when I said, well, I'd be interested, they said, yeah, but you're in the wrong place. So we can send it to you. Now, for one, Max, tell us a little bit first where you are, how you got into this, a little bit kind of like the origin story of how you got into what you're doing these days.
Yeah, perfect. So my name is Maxwell Nee. I'm the managing partner of Oweno Wine and Whiskey Investment. Oweno is Greek for wine. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's a bit of a funny word. It's a Latin word. Yeah. And so there's 2 parts to my background. So I spent 5 years in corporate banking, where I managed finance and investments and things like that. And then I went out to start my own online coaching business, which was, did really great. Like we grew. Thanks to finding pockets of opportunity, we grew 300% in about 5 months during the first 5 months of the lockdown. And then I had some great income. And then I started looking for places to put my income because, I love investing. I've always loved the idea of, having my money work for me. And, if you do that enough, then ideally, then you don't have to work for money. Sort of it works for you and you create more freedom for yourself, right? So, one example is I was in Chicago having a drink with a friend at a bar, and we sit down at the bar. It's a beautiful bar, and the bartender says, what do you want to drink? And I said, an old fashioned. And old fashioned is a drink that's usually made with bourbon, but I like to have it with whiskey. So I told him I wanted it with whiskey. He's like, great, Macallan 12 or 18. And the difference between the 12 or the 18 is that the 18 is 6 years older, but exactly the same liquid. Everything's all exactly the same. And so I thought, I'm on holiday, why not order the 18? Never had an 18 before I drank it. It was delicious. Gave some to my friend. He drank about half of it. He's like, wow, this is delicious, right? And then I asked the bartender, how much was this again? And then he said, 125. And I said, no, not how much is the tab so far? How much is this drink here? And then he said, 125. And then my friend next to me starts laughing at me. I thought, wow, I didn't know this drink was $125 plus tip. And then I asked him, I said, how much was the 12? And he said 25. And then I thought, wow, so 6 years of aging equals a 500% growth in the value of the asset, for the end consumer. There's more to it than that, but just that idea, right? And then I thought to myself, if I'm from Australia, if I bought property, in Sydney that could see the opera house, if I bought property in New York, if I bought real estate, if I bought stock shares or whatever, the odds of that asset increasing 500% in 6 years is, I've never seen that before. I'm sure it happens, but I've never seen it before.
Not even in the stock market, or you got to be extra lucky.
Yeah, or you're going to take a lot of risk, and fortunately, wine whiskey doesn't have that type of high volatility risk. It just has like slow, dependable, steady hand returns because the value is in the aging. The value is in time. You can't cheat time, so right. The value is absolute in many ways. So that was probably one of my first eye-opening moments into the industry. I've always had like this fascination of luxury alcohols and why people would pay so much and, what makes them different to normal alcohol that isn't so luxury. And then I originally came onto this company as a client. I loved it, loved the process. And then after a while being a client, when I was really happy and, learn a bit more about the investment, I said, okay, I want to do two things. I want to bring wine and whiskey investment to Australia because I know that no one's doing it in Australia. So I have a bit of a first mover advantage there. And then also I want to share it with the world in an investment fund. So that's what I'm working on now.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And you said you brought it to Australia. What are the other places around the world that the company is serving?
Yeah. So the company is a global company. It's been around since 2015. So it's been around for, about 9 years now. Just to give you an idea of returns in 2021, we're calculating the numbers for last year now because we're still in January. 2021, we did 15.87%. We've got more than 100 full-time people in the team across 4 continents, speaking 6 languages, because these are international assets. They transcend language and geography, and they're enjoyed by people all over the world. But the core business is in London because that's where the biggest market is for both wine and whiskey.
Okay, that's very cool. And just for our audience members and myself, because I want to learn about it too, and maybe we work together on that, at least as a guinea pig. As I always say to my clients in the mentoring business, I'm always happy to be the guinea pig so I can tell them about it from a personal experience, which does mean anybody who listens and says, hey, what Max is telling me is just right down my alley. I want to do it. Don't wait for me, just go directly to Max. But one of the things, and it kind of, when you said, other markets like real estate or stock market or stuff like that, I remember that there were times, that tells you how old I am, where you could actually ask to get your actual stock certificate sent to you, which is kind of a segue to say, okay, how does this work if I, for example, were to decide to invest in whiskey? Am I going to get the bottle or bottles that I'm investing in sent to me, or are they going to be kept somewhere in a storage unit, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. So we help people to invest in stock that's held in bond. So what in bond means is that sales and alcohol tax hasn't been added to it yet. Mm-hmm. So you get to trade and buy and exit the asset for its true value, which means that you can exit it anywhere in the world. So for example, in Australia, if you were to buy a bottle of fine wine from the supermarket or the liquor store, there's a 49% add-on of sales and alcohol tax in Australia. So that means, 1/3 of your investment is burnt on taxes. And because alcohol is so expensive in Australia, you can't really make a margin or a growth by buying it there and then trying to sell it in Europe, because the tax just sort of kills your exit opportunities. So what we do is we help clients to only buy stock held in bond in the largest bonded warehouse in the world, which is called London City Bond. There's like jewelry there, diamonds, gold, whiskey, wine, all sorts of things, more than 12 million bottles there. And when it's held in that place as well, it's held in the perfect lighting, temperature, humidity, which then allows it to be independently valued and insured. So just like when you buy a piece of real estate, you want it to be insured in case of an accident happens, weather, nature, fire, or whatever. You want these assets to be insured as well, because they're physical assets, and accidents do happen, in transport, all that sort of stuff. So you want insurance cover all the time. You don't want to be holding a $30,000 bottle in your fridge at home and people sort of taking it out, putting it back in. Like that's very stressful.
Right. No, that makes sense. Now, on the volume, you mentioned they are held in bond. Does an investor get some sort of a numbered bottle that they actually own, or are they just, in a sense, owning a fraction of a larger lot?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So there's a few companies have come out that created like fractional, like crowdfunding for a 50,000 euro wine portfolio, $50,000 wine portfolio. So you can do that as well. Most of them start from about $250 euros up to like $10,000. You can invest as much as you like, really. But the clients that we work with are probably a bit like yourself, Axel. Like they've got a passion for this type of asset. They find it interesting. They find it enjoyable to own their own thing. So we have we are one of the only firms that have like our own app where you can log in and check the value of your assets and show your friends the bottles that you have and things like that, whether it's wine or whiskey. So you can, own it privately.
Okay. So I basically can say, okay, you mentioned, what was it, McClellan, or what was the bottle that?
McClellan,
yeah. So I would potentially be able to buy, like, let's say the 6-year-old, and then I have it on the app, and I would see, when it's 8 or 10 years old, then how much more it would be worth if sold, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And people love having their own personal portfolios because everyone asks the same question of, if I change my mind, can I just drink it? And of course, the answer is yes.
Actually, when I first looked into it, I thought, as I mentioned, that little story that they only do Austria and Germany. But when I looked into it, one of the things that I thought made so much sense was that they said on the website, and I don't know if you guys do that too, they said, when you're ready to invest, always buy 2 bottles of the same kind. And in very small print underneath, it said, you never know if you want to drink one.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you drink one and you sell one, so you can afford to drink one.
Yeah. So you want to at least double your money, right? As long as you at least double your money, then
you can drink the other one. Okay. All right. So now, one of the things when I first looked into it, and I'm by no means want to claim that I went anywhere deep into it, but one of the things that at least occurred to me, and now having you as an expert probably able to address this, was, for one, there are these very established labels and producers, especially when it comes to whiskey, where you can typically assume that if you have enough patience, you can make good profit, not necessarily exactly how much it will be, but you will make profit because it's an established brand and an established distillery and all that kind of stuff. And then in addition to that, there are, special, I don't know if the right term is vintages, but special editions or something like that coming out. So are you saying, okay, well, if you want to have a certain reasonable expectation of gain over time, start with these and then you can add some more? Or how do people actually get some advice or from you guys, from experts who have experience in this, if you're new? I mean, just because I like wine and maybe a whiskey every once in a while, I would by no means have any idea which ones are the more traditional ones and to, reasonably invest in them, which ones might be, quote unquote, and I know you might not like to hear this, but a good bet, so to speak, that they could become a good thing in the long run because they have only made, 5,000 bottles and never will have that edition again. Like that.
Yeah. Great question. So I'm a big fan of, just because I own scissors, I don't try to cut my own hair. I get a professional to do that. So in terms of, wine, whiskey, investment analysis, we have people in the team who, on average, between 4 or 5 of them have 80 years experience of industry experience, watching these consumption trends, because you got to remember what we're basically waiting for is scarcity, so if you have 10-year-old Macallan or 10-year-old bottle of wine, everyone's drinking it now, you want to wait until 11 year or 12 to then settle it back into the market at a premium because there's no more left. You know what I mean? So you're holding like the last highly desired bottle of wine, whiskey, or whatever for that particular year or vintage. So that's the position that you want to be. So it's like, how do you reverse engineer that position Yeah, you talk to people like our expert wine team. So our director of wine, essentially director of investment, is a gentleman called Justin Knock. So he's a master of wine. We have 3 of them in the company, plus another one, which is a candidate. So fun fact, there's actually more astronauts in the world than there are masters of wine. It's a very, very hard accolade to get your hands on. And for example, Justin has been judging the Decanter World Wine Awards since 2005, and he's a guest judge often in like South Africa and Australia and places like that. Our team is at the forefront of information of, what's new, what's trending, what people are drinking, what people like, what they don't like, what's getting PR and that sort of thing, so that we can, feed that information arbitrage directly to our clients and then allow them to get in front of the wave.
Yeah, that's actually cool. I mean, one of the questions, because I've talked about it oftentimes, in almost every investment class, you see cycles, right? So like one thing I've been wondering, because I've lived in California for quite a while, and I remember when the big craze was everybody wanted to have Merlot. And then a while later, everybody wanted to have Pinot Noir, and then everybody wanted to have Rosé. So I've always been wondering, well, are those things that were in favor, like cycles in other investments, ever come back? Not so much only because of scarcity, but is it really that more the hype of a certain variety rather than really the taste of people changing that much? So do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, so one thing, what impacts the value of these assets is basically more people drinking them than there is supply. That's it, so, and that's pretty easy to see happen in the market, because you got to think it takes 10 years for this bottle to be ready, and it takes 10 seconds to open it and drink it, and 10 seconds to open and drink another one and another one. So when you start to see bottles being opened and drunk at mass, whether it's wine or whiskey, if you could just get in there early enough and you have the insight, or you have a team that can advise you, okay, these bottles are about to be drunk and opened, these bottles are about to be popular because of the time of the year or whatever, then that's really, really valuable information, And for example, if there's a bottle of wine where it's peak drinking age 10 years, what you usually find is that 70 to 80% of the uplift happens in the last 2 to 3 years. There's a hockey stick right at the very end, because that's when everyone's opening it to drink it. So it gets really scarce, and all the restaurants want it, the hotels want it. Restaurants and hotels don't want to hold bottles of wine for 7 years until they can sell it.
That totally makes sense. When we're talking about a particular vintage, basically, or a special edition that was only made in that 1 year, I can see that scarcity over time aspect working very well. My question was a little more, I literally know that in certain parts of California where I live, wineries ripped out certain kinds of grapes and replanted different ones because they had seen an enormous growth in a certain variety and they wanted to participate. And they basically came in kind of like at the middle of the distribution, if you want to, like the normal bell curve distribution with their stuff. I've always been wondering to what extent people actually discover that they like something for really truly liking it, and then they tell their friends, and it's kind of more from a bottom-up generic kind of thing. Is it a matter of, certain things being hyped, certain things, like I remember Charles, what is it called? Tubac Chuck suddenly won awards in wine tastings, blind tastings. And they said, well, it's a $2 or $3 wine that you can get at Trader Joe's in the US, right? And now there's no reason not to buy that versus something that costs $10 or $15 until people started tasting like a real Pinot and a Tubac Chuck Pinot and never. No. There's something about what I experienced myself and what I'm supposed to be told. The most egregious thing I have to say as a German is when people told me, you mentioned Chicago, that there is a new craze in Chicago where you put Jägermeister in Coke. And how disgusting is that? I know the company in Braunschweig, they were going crazy making Jägermeister for the US market.
No, I understand your question now. Okay, so great question, right? Because whiskey came from Scotland, right?
Right.
Scotch whiskey. And Scotch whiskey has, 1,000 years of branding, like very, very strong brand. When everyone sees an expensive scotch in a whiskey in a movie or wherever, they assume that it's scotch. That's really powerful branding. Just like when everyone sees an expensive bottle of wine, they might assume that it's French. It's a very, 1,000 years of branding. Right now, a lot of people would say that Irish whiskey is a better investment than Scotch whiskey. And the question is why? The answer to that is that Irish whiskey, if you ever tasted it, if anyone's listening to this, go have a taste of it. Not Jameson's, outside of Jameson's, like something a bit more unique and a bit more exclusive, less sort of mainstream. If you were to try it, you would realize that it tastes quite sweet, more approachable, smoother on the tongue. And it doesn't say age 20, 25 years. So you're not paying the 20, 25 year price for that smooth, sweet taste. It just is. And so Irish whiskey has done really well recently because the majority of the population, sweet, smooth, approachable, suits their taste palates, right? So it comes down to, is your drink going to be consumed by a majority of the population? If it is, then you have a real winner. So it's taste palates as well as spending capacity. I heard somewhere once that 97% of the wine bought in America, it's less than $10. 97%, because there's taste palate in there as to why, and there's also the fact that people they want to drink more, so they want to spend less. They want to drink more bottles.
But you're a little too polite, I believe, Max, because there's also something to be said about the lack of wine culture. If you look at the tradition, I mean, you guys chose Greek name, right? Because the Greeks and the Romans, and even I think the Egyptians already made wine. The Indians, or the Native Americans, as they're now called, they didn't, right? And I'm not saying that is a flaw or anything like that, but I've gone to the United States well before we moved there for almost all my life, and nobody drank wine when I first got there, like in the 70s and 80s. And it grew basically because it was more like an in thing, you wanted to be different, you wanted to be special. Now it has evolved, and I'm not saying there aren't good wines or stuff like that. But culturally, it's just, you mentioned France, but I think it doesn't even have to be. You can almost take most of the places in Western Europe that have for hundreds, if not thousands of years, had wine as just a beverage, as part of meals. And if it's a special thing, the church has wine and stuff like that, right? So I think there's a little bit to be.
Jesus used to drink wine, so
yeah. But there's a little bit of a cultural component in there as well, I believe. So coming to the end of the conversation, I'm sure some people say, okay, since you guys are talking about this as an investment, tell us a little bit, if I were interested, where does it start? What makes sense? What kind of money are we actually talking about? Can you give a little bit of an idea about that?
Yeah, great question. So I'll share a bit about the strategy, because where people get a bit lost in translations, I think that we're just buying bottles and hoping that the price goes up. That's absolutely not the case. There's a lot more to the strategy. The strategy is more or less, let's say a bottle's worth $100 today, but it's 7 years old. So what we want to do, and what we do for our clients, is we then go back and find that producer. As long as it's a good bottle, we know that people are drinking it. We find that producer, go in there, negotiate, the best price at that bottle, more or less at year zero, right? And if we can get in at year zero or year 1, 2, and 3, and it's being on the shelf at year 7, we more, not all the time, I can't promise performance, but most of the time we pretty much get in there at like 60% below what it will be when it actually hits the shelf. So we're not buying expensive and hoping that it goes up. We're working backwards from the end price and then buying in cheap early so that you can ride the appreciation wave. And what we offer is what we call managed portfolios. So a fully managed portfolio is, for example, I'd ask you, Axel, what's your goals? My goal, and often we hear people who say, my goal is to buy a house in 5 years. I've got $25,000 my deposit right now. I'd love to have 40, 50 in 5 years. We say, great. So then we create for them a portfolio that they can have an aim to exit in about 5 years. And, on average, as long as we're achieving, the results that we have been achieving, which, could be anywhere between 15 or 15+%, or maybe a little bit less, but around that sort of mid-teen number, then yeah, it's a good chance that their portfolio will turn from 25 into 40 in like a high yielding term deposit account. And then they can take it out and go buy their house or go buy their car or whatever.
Right. Okay. And is there a minimum that people have to meet to start?
Yeah. So the minimum is $5,000. So we make it really, really easy for people to get started. Usually people put in money 3-4 times a year, because they get their bonus and things like that. They want to put more money in. So we make it really easy for people to start. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that is a great kind of overview and introduction to what you do, how you do it, how much it costs, and what kind of things. And obviously, we can dive into the details of strategy and stuff like that. And that's basically what people will have to do when they get in touch with you. But before we come to an end and tell them how they can get in touch with you, I always ask the same 2 questions to every guest. So the first one is, if you could meet anybody, past or present, who would it be and why?
Oh, great question. If I could meet anybody, past or present, there's so many. I probably would want to meet some type of athlete who I'm not sure. What's yours? Just to help me out a little bit.
Well, right now, I would probably say Elon Musk. Maybe,
Elon Musk is definitely up there. Yeah.
It's not because of what he does and stuff. I think there's enough information out there. I always love to make up my own mind about how is the person really when the cameras are off, when there is nobody necessarily, when you're just sitting, maybe have a glass of wine, since we now know that he likes red wine. And just sit down and say, okay, so, what drives you? What are the things? Are you annoyed about all this attention, that kind of stuff? I would have a few questions like that, mainly to kind of dig out a little bit. Who are you really as a person? Because my perception, other than most of the media, is that the guy is so direct, and I like this because I'm German, in his intention to just help humanity. But it is something that is, for one, very unique, especially at that level. And number 2, the media can't handle something like that. Just straight out goodness is not desirable for the media. It has to be catastrophic and something that they can criticize and put you down. And that's the whole machinery, in my opinion, is worked around and built around that. So if you have somebody who says, okay, we can't burn this stuff, so we need electricity. We want to go to Mars to have an alternative if we blow up this place here and stuff. And fully aware that it's most of all of these things never going to be all done by the time the clock is up, so to speak, right? But that's why I'm saying, I can make my own opinion, but having a chance to get to know the person, bit of what we know about it, and see, okay, is the person the way I think he is or not? That would be fascinating, right? So okay. The other question, Max, is, if you had a time machine, where would you go and why?
Okay, if I had a time machine, I would go to when they created, I don't know what year it was, but the year that they created school, the Industrial Revolution to create school, just to understand how disconnected the reasons why they created it then compared to how effective it is now. Because I don't believe that school is very effective for the majority of people.
And what kind of school are you talking about?
Like the school that everyone has to go to, like high school, primary school. Like I go back to because at some point people were sitting somewhere deciding how to structure this thing. And I want to understand the decision-making process that they went through to create something that's worked then, but I don't believe works now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I can give you a hint if you're truly interested. When you go and research the scientific method, that's basically how it started. And then the over time, the ambition was to make it available to more and more people. I'm with you when you asked the question, why and did it ever really work? And does it work now? I would surmise it doesn't work now. And it probably never really did for the masses, because we didn't have Gutenberg and nobody could print thousands of books. Now, if you wanted to come up with your own ideas, you also needed to be able to write and read, right? So first it came to, okay, you can just listen and draw conclusions. Then you learn how to read and write. Now you can take notes. And then ultimately the next level was, okay, this is basically university level, right? You reach a certain level and then you're either highly born into like, monarchy or stuff like that, or aristocracy, and therefore had access to it, or your family had some money from somewhere that allowed you to participate in those lectures. And like I said, the intention was to get it further and further down into the masses. But the problem with it is that was so that you could apply the highest forms of mathematics, right? Like what the Greeks came up with, like Aristotle and stuff like that. That guy was basically a lecturer, and he lectured what he had found about, or people like Newton or stuff. But the average person doesn't typically have that need. And the method, that's my critique about it. The method has not changed. And it has deteriorated now. That to say, did you learn something, is basically proof that you are able to regurgitate stuff, right? So I would say in the United States, where I've done a lot of training myself, why do we do so much training in industry? I believe is because in high school and even in bachelor's level college, people learn the material to pass the test and then try to forget it as fast as possible to make room in their brain to learn the next thing to pass the test. Right? But the reason they have to do that is because the breadth of stuff to learn is way too wide. The original idea was, if you want to be a mathematician, you listen to the one guy who had the book about math. That's all you did. Everything else was irrelevant, right? But nowadays we learn 100 different topics for maybe 2 weeks and then forget about them again.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I really disagree with. It's the application, I don't mind learning something if there's an application that's going to be useful, then it's motivating. But
basically, I think the fallacy is, if you look at the university system, if you are pretty clear what you want to study, you get a pretty clearly defined list of the things that you have to attend classes for to ultimately end up with your degree. But by the time you get to that, you have already gone through 12 or 13 years where you were pumped full of stuff just to pass the test without any choice.
Yeah, right? And without any like real purpose or like direction.
Well, if it were like, if it were to say, okay, let's in the early stages make sure that everybody learns how to read and write, and then give them plenty of opportunities to find out what they're passionate about. And then when they know what they're passionate about, then let's get really good in that. But the only choice you get to do that is when you find out that working for somebody else is not really the right thing, and you want to do something you've always been passionate about, and hopefully you have enough money to try. But that's not at 15 and 19 and 21. That's typically more like at 35, 45, 55, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, I think we are very aligned on that, but I have my doubts if you and I will change the system, even though we know. So, Max, I really appreciate that you came on the show. Like I said earlier, please tell people that listen to us, how can they get started? How can they learn more about the strategy, and how they can maybe find out if this kind of an alternative way of investing is something for them?
Yeah, cool. Perfect. So, my name is Maxwell Nee. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I can share my email, as well as a link as well to some more information in the show notes. And you can Google us. The company is called Oeno, so OENO. You'll find us pretty easily. Wine investment and whiskey investment.
Okay, very cool. And I hope we can do it again. And maybe at some point I become one of your investors, and then I can be the guinea pig, like I said at the start. So Max, thanks for making the time. Thanks for coming on. And I hope it was an interesting show for everybody. So if you liked it, give us a like. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. And other than that, we see you in the next show.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and sign up for the Apple Podcast link. And if you like to talk to me, sign up for a strategy call. Hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.